Good morning and welcome to Member Focus Monday. I'm Christina Schaefer, Director of Social Media for HAR, and I'm very happy to be joined this morning by a returning guest to our program. I think this is now his third appearance on our show, Mike Mengden, broker and president of Terra Residential. Welcome back to the program, Mike.
Thank you. Love to be here.
Thank you
Love it.
so much. Well, we've been talking about fair housing this month, but we've also been talking about the rental market and how much it's heating up. And you're going to talk to us a little bit about both today.
Okay.
We're going to discuss all of the common questions, the issues you're seeing out in the field, the best ways to represent tenants and landlords, and how to protect yourself from any potential fair housing violations. So we have a lot to discuss today. And I know when we were preparing for this program, Mike, you said, how many hours do we have? But we've got some great educational opportunities that Mike's going to share today as well for some additional training after today's session. So let's get right into it though. But Mike, if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself for anyone who doesn't know who you are and what you do.
I'm old. I got my broker's license in 1980. So back then, I didn't even have to have a salesman's license beforehand. I had a degree from UT, and that allowed me to sit. And our books weren't this long. Our books was a pamphlet, and so so I got my broker's license way back then. Didn't really practice on the sales side or leasing side until '88, and then started managing property in '88. And been managing ever since. Opened up a company in '91 and been here for 35 years. Always volunteering, do a lot of government affairs stuff with HAR, Texas Realtors, National Association of Residential Property Managers, NARPM, and that's the fun stuff of the business. That's what I like doing the most.
Absolutely, and we thank you. You've been volunteering with the associations for many years, and so we of course thank you for all that work that you do. Let's start it off by just talking about the rental market generally. We actually just released our rental report last week. Every month, HAR releases a rental report in addition to the sales report. So tell us about just the rental market. We've been hearing it's hot. What are you seeing, Mike?
I'm seeing it's fairly hot. There's a couple of issues that we have to be aware of. There are more apartments coming online in Houston this year than I think ever in our history. And the apartments, like everybody else, wants to fill them up. And they're all class 1 and 2. We're not building C and D apartments anywhere. And so I have seen, for you guys that do tenant rep, I'm seeing huge commissions offered to the tenant reps that bring in a potential tenant. So I think the single family market, most of what most of us do in that arena, is going to hurt a little bit because of the incentives that are being offered on the apartment side to get people to come in.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, there's a lot of inventory here that is 70s and 80s built homes that are investor owned, and those investors we've been having talks for the last few years. They can't rent that house if they don't update it. It's just Houston is too diverse. Houston's too picky, whatever word you want to use. They're expecting that they want to pay for the convenience. And if you've got an old 80s house with old 80s fixtures, and we still see them out there, don't have garage door openers and don't have this, and people aren't going to rent that. You're going to have to tell the owner they're going to have to fix it up to rent it. And that's probably the biggest things that I see on the horizon this year. So.
Okay. Great, thank you. And of course, we can post a link in the comments to our most recent rental report. Again, it was just released last Wednesday, so go take a look at it so you can see the numbers specifically. I like to, whenever we have subject matter experts on, Mike, like you, I'd like to address mistakes that you're seeing, common mistakes, because I think in order for us to really be able to follow proper procedure, it's sometimes important to highlight the mistakes that you see. So tell us, what are you currently seeing from realtors when it comes to working with tenants and landlords that maybe they shouldn't be doing?
On the landlord side, there's really no difference between a exclusive right to lease form and an exclusive right to sales form. The duties and responsibilities of the agent are the same. You don't have anything more allowed on the leasing side. And the biggest problem I see, and we'll talk more about it later, is that agents think they have ability to do more stuff. We have a paragraph in the listing agreement that talks about make ready. And the forms committee in Austin, we want to take it out because I don't
Mhm.
think your E&O covers it. And so there's a lot of agents trying to be helpful. And so they do a bunch of make ready stuff for the landlord, but that's not, there's a make ready paragraph, but I don't think your E&O covers it if you don't do it right.
Mhm.
So you have to check and make sure you're qualified to do that part of it, because it doesn't, you don't do it on the sales side either. The other one is that and I have a standing offer with anybody that can show me on a pre-printed exclusive right to lease form where you have any right or any authority to do any screening, and it's not there. And agents will tell me in class all the time, my job is to screen. My job is to screen. No, your job is not to screen. We have other programs for that.
Mhm.
So your job is to negotiate the lease, but not to do the screening.
Mhm.
And these are federal laws that changed in 2008. And so older, more seasoned agents mess it up more than the younger ones do because they don't realize that the law changed. And
Mhm.
so but we'll talk about that a little bit later. But
Yeah.
that's probably the biggest side on the biggest things on the owner side. On
Mhm.
the tenant side, there's two. Nobody, and I mean nobody, wants to sign a buyer tenant rep agreement. The
Mhm.
agents are horrible about it. Every class, I tell them, why aren't you using this form? Why aren't you using this form? There's going to come a day when you're going to need it. Guess what? That's 2024. You're going to have that form now. And they have no ability to fill one out, and they don't put any money in it. And I
Mhm.
keep telling them, you're worth something. Put something in there. And they will also, when they get into class, then turn around and do the exact opposite. And they go, well, I'm just not going to show those properties because they're not going to give me enough what I want. And I'm just going, you can't do that. That's a
Mhm.
violation of code of ethics and all these other things. If and what's going to happen this summer is you're going to see it's leaving MLS, so you're not going to know anything, and so everything is going to have to be done outside or not at all.
Mhm.
Learn to put money in a buyer rep. So take NAR's new free ABR course this year,
Mhm.
because you've got to figure out how to put the money in it. And I guess the other big mistake is that people don't realize that, like a sale, but unlike a management agreement, when the lease is signed, you're done. So you don't, when the tenant calls you 2 months later and wants you to call the landlord on their behalf because the landlord's doing such and such that they don't like, that is not your job. You don't have that
Mhm.
authority anymore. Property manager all day long. But on a regular leasing transaction, agents start trying to get back involved, and they're not involved anymore. And that
Mhm.
can get people in trouble. And I've seen a lot of people get into that mistake where they end up, somebody files on them because they interfered with a contract that they're no longer a part of. So
You
that's
know,
probably the biggest ones that I see.
thank you so much for that. On the landlord side, you mentioned, well, my job is screening, or on the tenant side, you said that they're calling once they have issues later, later on. It sounds like to me on both sides, maybe there needs to be a more clearly defined role for that agent and their client. Do you recommend, I mean, because we see this with sales transactions all the time. Here's the list
Right.
of things that I'm going to do for you. Do you recommend that agents have something like that when they're representing tenants and
Yeah,
landlords, so that you have
we
a
have
clearly defined job?
we have the listing agreement, and that really defines what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do. But I think we need to take it a little bit farther, and so that's a really good idea. We're talking about that right now. I know that the residential sales forms committee right now is meeting at Texas Realtors to talk about what they're going to do with all the commission paragraphs and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But we're looking at it on the leasing side too, because I think we need to have a little more of do's and don'ts and a little more of a list of things. This is acceptable. This is not acceptable. Types of things that people can get into, because I think that will help them down the road. So,
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, it's anything like that we can put together, which we're all aware of that we need more of when we meet. That is stuff that we're trying to get. So, and then more education.
And
Get
of
get as
course,
much education as you can find.
we preach
So,
education on this program,
yeah.
so yes, absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about tenant selection criteria.
Okay.
You already mentioned a little bit about this, but what tenant selection criteria do you advise clients to use?
The one that Texas Realtors has already produced. That
Mm-hmm.
one's great. It is in. It is not in zip forms.
Mm-hmm.
So when you want to use it, it is actually located on the. I think y'all are going to put it in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
It's a form that is. on in the legal page at Texas Realtors, it's a Word document. So it is not your fill-in form. So the owner can change it, and it gives one page of instructions and then one page of your tenant selection criteria. And so you can go. It's actually law. The law
Mhm.
says that you must provide the tenant with a tenant selection criteria, or you can't keep an application fee if you reject them. They have to know what you're going to check and what your fees are. Everybody's talking about junk fees right now. So
Mhm.
you have to tell them on the top what you're going to be putting in what the selections are, what you're going to look for. Typical stuff is employment, uh, number of years of active employment, number of times of the rent is requested income, verifiable income, um, how long you've lived at your current residence, whether or not you're getting evicted, whether or not you'll take evictions, what you're going to do regarding criminal. Be very careful about criminal. You're not supposed to be looking at arrests anymore. You're supposed to be looking at convictions. And you're only supposed to be looking at big ones,
Mhm.
and a lot of people are going, well, if there's any criminal record, I don't want it at all. Are you really going to hold somebody that smoked a doobie 20 years ago? You're not going to let them rent a house. Come on. So you have to pick and choose what you can get. So, you're looking at the violent felonies, the sex abuse stuff, that kind of stuff. Those are
Mhm.
the things you need to watch out for. The other stuff, if they've paid their debt to society, rent them a house.
Mhm.
It's not their fault anymore. But
Yeah.
that's a really good document. There's one thing that's missing from it since the last time we updated it, and it's debated on whether or not people want to use it, and that's how many people you will allow in a property.
Mhm.
And the Texas law says no more than three per bedroom.
Okay.
HUD has HUD won't nail it down specifically, but two per bedroom or two per bedroom plus one is usually an acceptable number. And
Mhm.
the reason they do that way is there was an old case where somebody who lived in a one bedroom apartment, couple, they had a child, and that exceeded their two per bedroom, and the apartment evicted them because they had a kid, and
Mhm.
so that broke two rules of the fair housing, and so
Mhm.
they've changed that.
Okay.
So I recommend or talk to your attorney, but two or two and a half, something in a reasonable range. But the law in Texas, you can't allow more than three.
Okay.
So
Very good. And we did share the link to the guidelines that Mike mentioned in the comments. Demetria said it goes to a login page. That's a Texas Realtors login page. So you just have to
that's
log
great.
in on Texas Realtors website to access that information, similar to logging into access zip form. We actually had a really good question that came in from Demetria as well. Backing up a little bit here, what recourse is available when lease listing agents, fail to honor the agreement between brokers? In short, they don't pay promptly. Can the form be revised to establish a time limit for when the payment is due and payable?
That's a good question. I would submit that question to forms at texasrealtors.com and say
Okay.
I would like to have that changed in the form. It basically says it's payable when both parties sign the lease and the tenant pays the deposit, the first month's rent, and any prorate. That's when it's payable. Now, I can't dictate when a particular company pays, and I've been hearing some of these apartment complexes that are offering the really huge commissions are taking, like 2-3 months before they're going to send you a check.
Mm-hmm.
And for those of you out there that are listing the properties, pay the referral agents, please. We send out a check within 24 hours of all that happening. We
Mm-hmm.
always have. I want people to show my houses. How do you show your houses if you don't pay the agents you've agreed to pay?
Mm-hmm.
So I say immediately, but there's no law that I am aware of that says you have so many days to pay.
Okay, but we can submit the request. What was the email address again? Forms.
It's forms at texasrealtors.com.
Thank you so
And they
much for
will
that.
every single comment they get on any form we look at. So
Excellent. So you mentioned earlier that realtors we shouldn't be screeners. Okay, so what is the proper screening process?
make the landlord do it. That's number one.
Mm-hmm.
Um, two, the main thing what you're looking for is when you're screening a tenant, normally you're looking at the credit, the eviction, um, criminal, sex database, that type of stuff. And then maybe looking at if you can verify the landlord and how they paid and all that kind of stuff, and the employer and those types of how much income they make. Um, when you're on your own, it's tough. We have a member benefit. It's My Smart Move, and that's a member benefit of Texas Realtors. You can use that, and it's great because it removes the tenant, the agents from it. Here's the problem we've had when you're trying to be helpful. I've seen it a ton, and HAR and I are on speed dial with this one. If you put in agent remarks, please submit copy of credit report with application.
Mm-hmm.
That's mostly illegal and has been since 2008. And HAR still sees it every once in a while, and they'll flag it when they see one.
Mm-hmm.
Because of the Privacy Act that was passed federally, you can't pass somebody's credit around. So if a tenant, if it's you're having it in your office and you say, I want to run credit before I even show a property to a tenant, that's fine. You can do that. But then that belongs to you. And as long as you have permission from the tenant to do that, you don't have permission to give it to anybody. And so the problem is the tenant runs it, they hand it to the listing, to their rep. Their rep then sends it to the listing agreement, to the listing agent. You've now committed one federal crime.
Mm-hmm.
Then the listing agent gives it to the landlord. You've now committed two federal crimes. And so you can't be passing somebody's private information around like that. So we recommend, there are other programs, but the member benefit is My Smart Move. My Smart Move doesn't do the landlord part and the employment part, but there's forms for that. On the forms library in Zip Forms, there is a verification of employment and a verification of residency form under the leasing section of the forms. And you can give that to your landlord. Texas Legal has decided that if you're in the middle of a transaction, you can loan those two forms to the landlord and they can fill those out and use them.
Mm-hmm.
But that way, if the owner can sign up for My Smart Move, doesn't cost them anything, then they get a code or a link or whatever they're doing these days over there. And then that can be given to the prospect. Prospect can go in, pay for the reports that the landlord wants, and then the landlord gets the reports and the agent's completely out.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the way we really want it to be. Not the case for property managers. We're very needy. And so we want everything sent to us and everything goes through us. That way we keep the owner out of the loop and and keep them safe. And we're the ones that are taking the responsibility of making sure that we do it the right way. So that's the best way to do it. There's another company I like a lot called tenantreports.com.
Okay.
And they will work with individual landlords. And so, and they will do the back end. They'll do the employment. They're going to cost a little bit more than the My Smart Move, but either one will work. But that's what you're looking for. And the agents should really stay out of it. Now, those of you repping tenants, make sure they fill out the application right. There's a big line in the bottom of it that says if you lie or if you omit stuff on here and we find it, and let me tell you, there's a lot of stuff on your credit report. So if you start lying and if you don't have all your addresses in and you don't have your right job and all that, it's going to pop up and there's a good shot you're going to get rejected. So make sure you fill out that right and use the proper forms, and agents just stay out of the middle of the screening part. So
excellent. Thank you, Mike. So we've mentioned forms a little bit. Obviously, you're just talking about forms. Are there any specific forms that you find really should be used but aren't being used as much as they should?
yeah, we've got like 55 forms that are leasing and property management related.
Mm-hmm.
And if you know the forms library, if you've been there, the 2000s, all the forms in the 2000s, those are all about leasing.
Mm-hmm.
And 2200s are all about property management.
Mm-hmm.
So be aware of that when you're looking at a form. 2200s are really kind of reserved for property managers. If you're not a property manager, be careful if you're going to use one of those forms.
Mm-hmm.
But then the 2000s are all for leasing. And I think one or two of them that I wish more people would use is some of the addenda. We've got some really good addenda. There is a requirement now on a lease that you use the flood disclosure. And it's a newer form. Came out in 2021, required for any new lease or any renewing lease starting in January of 22. And you have to get a new one every time you do a new lease.
Mm-hmm.
But this is the for those of us that are property managers, we hate it because we like to do everything and we can't sign that form. The landlord has to sign the form. It's like a lead-based disclosure. The
Mm-hmm.
landlord has to sign that form too. Um, so the flood disclosure is a big one. And so it's a new form, but it has to be part of any lease. And that one, and then the other one that I think that people don't use very much is we came up with one a while back, and it's been updated as HUD has updated its stuff. It's called Information About Assistance Animals,
Mm-hmm.
and it is a really good form. It's just informational, but give it to your land. Goes with your listing package to your landlord. You don't. It's not part of the lease, but it's on the listing packet side, and get your landlords to have that so that they have information knowing what the rules are if you are going to have an assistance animal. And we actually teach
Mm-hmm.
classes on this now, and we'll go
Yes.
over that a little bit later. But we teach that stuff with the idea that they're out there. And since the pandemic, more people have more issues. And so we are seeing more assistance animal requests and assistance for reasonable accommodation, which is a form that you can use. Tenant has to want a reasonable accommodation, then you have to agree that you'll look at it. Doesn't have to,
Mm-hmm.
you don't have to approve it, you just have to look at it. And you approve it if it's valid. But it's something that we I've been recommending for since we first got that form, that anybody filling out a property management agreement use it, and anybody that fills out a listing exclusive right to lease agreement use it and talk about it because it will happen. Over 60 to 70% of the people looking for a house have a pet.
Mm-hmm.
So if your owner says, I don't want any pets, you're automatically removing 60% of the potential tenant pool that would rent your house.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, we find that there are more assistance animal requests for properties that say no pets than there are for properties that are pet friendly.
Hmm.
So we say have pets, all kinds of things you can charge, make your owner comfortable. There's options on and it's now called the animal agreement. There's options there for pet, so take them. And quite frankly, if you get a group of property managers talking, experienced ones like me that have been around forever, some people are scared to death of pets. They think they're just going to destroy the house. And
Mm-hmm.
some of that happens, but remember the pet deposit that you collect adds on to the normal deposit you've already got. So you've got
Mm-hmm.
that big pool of money to use. And I bet in my career, I bet there hasn't been 5 or 6 times where we've had pet damage more than all the deposits we held. So
Mm-hmm.
it's not that big a deal. I'd be more worried about the kids, but that's fair housing. Don't say can't do anything about that. But the kids create way more damage than the pets do. But yeah, I would say be pet friendly. Uh,
Yeah.
there's exceptions. You got some weird kind of hardwood floors. You don't want big dogs, but
Mm-hmm.
other than that, I would say use those forms, and I think that those couple of forms would help immensely.
Well,
Get
and
the
I
word.
think having that conversation with the owner about that percentage, that 60% of people are going to have a pet, so you're ruling out a majority of the people that
Oh
could
yeah,
potentially
I
rent your
mean,
property.
yeah,
Coming up with a solution on the deposit side, I think is
yes,
a great one.
that's the issue. There's all kinds of choices. You can charge fees, deposits, pet rent, whatever you want to do, and
Mm-hmm.
whatever you and the owner are comfortable with. And believe me, folks in apartments have been paying it for years,
Yeah.
so there's not going to be much of a pushback. They love their people love their animals, and if that's what it takes to make the owner feel good, then that's what you do.
Very good. Well, thank you. And you have more information about animal, a class that's coming up that we'll talk about in just a
Yeah,
second too. But I'd like to, oh, actually, first, for anybody that's tuned in, if you have questions for Mike, now is the time. Please type your questions into the comments. I've seen people saying some great info. Multiple people have said great info being shared this morning, so we appreciate that, Mike. If there are any questions for Mike, please type them in. We actually did just have a couple come in. One from Dana asking, "What is a normal pet deposit?" Yeah.
that
Would
you
it
know,
really just kind of depend on the
it
property,
just
the amount of
depends on the
pets, the
property
situation?
and
Yeah.
what the owner's nervous about.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen them all over the board. I've seen the way the the leasing, the way the animal agreement is written, you can do any or all. So you can do a refundable pet deposit that just becomes not part of the. I'm sorry, I need to get in the new vernacular. We're changing all the forms now. An animal deposit, so you can have an animal deposit that is, and that attaches automatically by the wording in both documents to the regular deposit. So now, if that dog creates damage, you've got all of the money that you can use for that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you can do animal rent, and then you can do a one-time non-refundable fee. I know a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people do a one-time non-refundable fee because they want to do the carpet cleaning and the pet defleeing and all that kind of stuff when the tenant moves out, and it makes it easier for the tenant. They just move, and then when you do your make ready, you do the carpet cleaning and all that, and you've got the money for that already in hand.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I don't know. I see it all over the board, but typically, I wouldn't charge I wouldn't have a $2,000 rental and charge a $4,000 pet deposit. That would be a little high,
Yeah.
but but
What I'm
I
not
don't,
trying to
I
nail
don't.
you down to a number here, Mike, but just to help guide people here, because I had another question come in. What is a typical, in all caps, pet fee?
Okay.
Do you find that maybe something that members could do is similar to when you're running comps and you're looking for what is our pricing going
Yeah,
to be?
yeah,
Maybe
yeah. Go in
seeing what other
MLS and look. I
comparable,
mean,
yeah.
you're not talking about a huge amount of money in most cases. Sometimes you have a bigger if you have multiple pets, multiple animals, then there's more deposit. But
Mm-hmm.
a few $100s here, something like that, pet rent, and I wouldn't increase the rent by 50% either for having a pet.
Mm-hmm.
But I see a lot of stuff in the few $100s here, a few $100s there. The if the owner's more nervous, then more.
Mm-hmm.
And um, if you want to do pet rent, again, be reasonable. It's
Mm-hmm.
I see things from $10 or $15 all the way up to I've seen people. I've seen in MLS people charge $100, but typically
Mm-hmm.
that's going to be a bigger animal,
Yeah.
so they're a little more worried about it. But something in that ballpark. And what's it cost to clean and deflea a carpet? A
Mm-hmm.
few $100, so put that in as your fee if you want to do that, and something on that line. But this it can be all over the board too. Just start looking at comps, look at listings, and see what other people are charging.
Very good. Do
There's
you
all
have any
kinds of
advice that realtors could give to clients that have big dogs or certain breeds? You find, and they mentioned specifically pit bulls here. Sometimes you see, specific breeds being
Yeah, there's the
excluded.
list of breeds that's out there.
Mm-hmm.
And these are the what we would call the restricted breeds. And a lot of us restrict them, and we say we're not going to take those because they're so big and they have the propensity to maybe be vicious. Everybody says my pit bull is the nicest, sweetest dog in the world, and I agree. I've had one in training class with my dog, and it was a sweetheart and a wuss. But I don't know your dog.
Mm-hmm.
Your dog might eat me. Um, and so we see that a lot. And so I would say be pet friendly, but get a bigger deposit or get a
Mm-hmm.
bigger pet rent and do it that way. Again, I understand when you have hardwoods and you don't want a big old German Shepherd with those big old nails all over your really expensive, softer hardwoods.
Yeah.
I get that. But you also take the risk of having those animals turning into assistance animals, and then you get nothing.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't charge deposits, you can't charge pet rent, you
Okay.
can't charge pet fees, any of that stuff when you have something with assistance animals. So
And that was a question that both Lana and Marco had. What about service animals? Can you charge additional rent or a deposit?
nope, not a dime. And
Okay.
it says that in the animal deposit that if it isn't in fact, the entire paragraph in the animal agreement that talks about compensation and fees basically says this paragraph does not apply if you have an assistance animal.
Very good.
So,
A
but be
question.
aware, don't be scared of assistance animals.
Yeah.
Um, it doesn't happen that often. It happens more than it used to, but it's not
Mm-hmm.
something that happens all the time. And the laws were changed in 2020, so you have the right to have them. You can verify that that's a real animal and
Mm-hmm.
a real need for that. And
Very
so
good.
I'll give a plug. Come to the class on May 8th, and we'll talk about that for an hour. But
Excellent. Just a
but
quick
yeah,
question, because you mentioned the vernacular change. Pam is asking, what is the change in the vernacular between pet and animal, and what is the difference?
That's there is no real difference other than they're just saying everything is an animal and only certain things are pets. And
Hmm.
so they just changed it. TAA changed it a long time ago. And then
Hmm.
we've been slowly but surely finding it in every farm we've had in the last few years. And we just changed it to animal now. That's the more common reference to what you have because it may or may not be a pet. It may or may not be, even if it's an assistance animal, it's still an animal.
Hmm.
And so it is subject to damages. If that animal creates any damages to the property, you can use the normal. You don't have a deposit on that animal, but
Right.
you can use the normal deposit to take care of those types of things. So,
Okay.
but yeah, it's
Very
been
good.
changing everywhere. So
Very good. A few more questions came in that I'd like to touch on, and we'll get to as many
sure.
of these as we can. And of course, I know we have someone representative from your company that's tuned in, so maybe if we miss any questions, they can help out with those.
Okay.
Sandy asked, "Is there a time limit to get a response from the landlord on whether or not they've accepted or declined a tenant?"
Good question. And that one comes up because it's not printed anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
7 days in Texas.
Okay.
If it is not accepted within 7 days, it's automatically rejected. That's the state rule. Um, Fair housing. Be careful with that one.
Mm-hmm.
Be careful with those of you that are representing landlords. This might be the time that I mentioned this.
Mm-hmm.
Christine and I were talking about earlier. We have you have a duty to make sure that fair housing is followed. And sometimes we now have a new rule at Trek that if you're in the middle of a negotiation, you've only got 2 days to respond to it.
Mm-hmm.
So that helps a little bit, but that's not really in an offer. That's more once you have something in place. And so be careful if you know you have a tenant that is or a prospective tenant that is in a protected class and you present it to the owner and the owner just doesn't respond at all,
Mm-hmm.
that's a clue, and you need to pay attention to that. One of the webinars that they're going to put in the chat was given by Texas Workforce Commission. And we met them in February at the Midwinter, Texas Realtors Midwinter Conference, and they did a little presentation there. And we said, we want you to come and do this big presentation for Texas Realtors. And they did
Mm-hmm.
um, a couple of weeks ago. And so that's now available. And it was basically all the investigators. And if you get a fair housing complaint filed in Texas, Texas Workforce Commission runs it. HUD doesn't run it. They've subbed it out to Texas Workforce Commission. And one of the things that they told us about, they said the fair housing one, normally the fair housing, somebody discriminating on protected class, you would consider to be the landlord.
Mm-hmm.
But they held that this agent handed a driver's license to the landlord, and the landlord said, I'm not renting to anybody that looks like this. And the agent didn't terminate their listing agreement.
Mm-hmm.
And they continued to show the property and they continued to work with the landlord. And they said for the first time in a long time, they held that agent liable for fair housing also.
Mm-hmm.
Not just the landlord, they held the realtor in violation because they accepted that fair housing problem and continued to work around it. So sitting on an app that you don't like is a problem.
Mm-hmm.
So have a discussion with your landlord. There's two ways to run apps. You can either say, I want the first in, or I want the best in. Now, when you're doing sales, most people are going to say, I want the best one. A
Mm-hmm.
lot of people in leasing are scared of fair housing, so they're saying, I'm going to take the first one.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not a I'm on the best end side. I think my
Right.
fiduciary says I want the best app my client can get. So if I've got an app that comes in but what you don't want to do is become an app mill and start collecting a whole bunch of app fees.
Mm-hmm.
That'll get you in trouble too. So tell your landlord, here's the deal. What do you want? Do you want me to work with the first in and not even look at anything else until we solve that one? Or do
Mm-hmm.
you want me to look at all of them until we come up with the one that we like the best? Either way is fine as long as you don't commit fair housing restrictions against the first one. And what
Mm-hmm.
I do, and I would use something like this. We always call, if I've got an app in hand and we've got others coming, On a sale, there's no money invested in an offer until somebody accepts it. Leasing, that's not the case. You've got the application fee so they can run the background check. So we tell people, if we get an app and we said, I've already got an app in that we're working on, you have a choice. Do you want me to run your application and spend your client's money, or do you want to wait and see what happens with the first app? So
Mhm.
give them that option. And that way you're fair about it. And then that way you're not spending people's money, because we now have a rule. The tenant selection rule criteria rule came in because of people running 20 or 30 apps and then just picking the best one or the one they liked at the end of the week, and they made a ton of money on application fees,
Yeah.
and so that's been kind of frowned upon. So be careful
Okay.
with that. But yeah, the law is 7 days.
Very good. And thank you so much for sharing that example. We've been talking about fair housing all month really on this program.
Yeah,
And I think sometimes, people don't take it as seriously as they should when they hear those comments from clients. And so, really important
yeah, no.
reminder there. Thank you so much.
Learn how to fire clients.
Yeah. Another question, and we're getting, actually, we're over time already with you, Mike, but we still have some questions for you. So Kenethia was asking, what tools do you recommend using to identify fake pay stubs? Had an issue where
Oh,
the tenant was approved by a landlord, found out later the employment was fake, despite calling to verify and speaking with a quote unquote manager.
yeah,
She also, she added on, I use smartapartmentdata.com, but would love to know if there is a free tool.
I don't know that one.
Okay.
The use the form, the
Mm-hmm.
landlord, the verification form, and the employment form. I, as a habit over the years, if someone gives whatever phone number they give me on the application, I don't call that one.
Mm-hmm.
I look it up myself. That way, I have talked to a lot of brother-in-laws and a lot of sisters and a lot of people over the years, and we'll get the whole office around. Hey, I know this is a fake one, and so we'll start talking, because you'll hear them go, "And how much do they make? Hey, how much do I make?" And so so it gets really interesting. Um, Pay stubs are probably the number one fake document on the internet.
Mm-hmm.
Number two is the old service assistance animal certificates that have now basically all been outlawed. They're
Mm-hmm.
all fake. Um, it's now a letter, but the add it up.
Mm-hmm.
Take the pay stub they give you and add the numbers. I have found more fake pay stubs because the numbers don't add up. They change the top number, but they don't change all the numbers in the middle. And because that takes more work, you have to pay a little more for that fake stub than you have to pay for the regular fake stub. But yeah, fake pay stubs is a big deal. Um, there are some electronic services. Tenant Reports, I think, has some of it, where they will go in and they will come in and do they look at the person's bank account and they see how much money comes in and how much average comes in per month, and they can determine that's fairly close to what they said the pay is going to be. So
Mm-hmm.
there's methods around that now, but I think that's mostly going to be with people that use the bigger, heavier services like property managers. I don't know that that's going
Mm-hmm.
to be available too much on the other. But the main one is, if you're going to call for an employment, don't call the number that they put on the application. Go find that number for yourself.
Very good.
I'm sorry, have your landlord find that number for themselves.
Yes. Very good.
Yeah.
Thank you. And thank you for that question. Another question here. We haven't talked about safety this in this program, and Cindy was asking, as a safety precaution to the showing agent meeting a complete stranger to show a property, are we allowed to ask for a photo ID for prospective tenants before a showing to register for the tour? And of course, Mike, you know that we have Forewarn available to all MLS
Yeah.
subscribers. So do you recommend they use that? Is there
Yes,
something else that?
absolutely. I would use Forewarn. I would also go to the training calendar and look up Mike Wong and take his safety classes. So, I mean, it's still dangerous out there.
Mm-hmm.
I'm more worried. It's not as popular in Texas as in other places, but a lot of places use an electronic lockbox that is self-showing.
Mm-hmm.
And so the tenant goes up there and they give them an ID or they give them a credit card or something, and they get access to the property, and there's no agent in the house at all.
Mm-hmm.
I am not a huge fan of that. I still think that I'm sorry. Are you hearing that? Okay. There's a new tenant moving in
It's
next
okay.
door.
It's
I think
okay.
construction's going. They've started the construction. Um, but so I don't like. I Everybody has different rules, but I would get your office to do a safety class for all the
Mm-hmm.
people that are in your office. I think that's the best way. But yes, absolutely. There is a law that says, and this was passed at the same time the other one was 2008, that said that the Privacy Act that says that you have a duty to verify the person you're running a background check on or the person you're leasing a house to is actually the person you ran the background check on. So I have a lot of people saying we use an electronic lockbox. We let them go check themselves in. We send them the lease over the internet.
Mm-hmm.
They sign the lease. They move in. I never meet them, and I go, you can't do that. You need to meet these people. You need to have an ID and say, yes, this is me.
Yes.
And so I think it's a good idea to do that. Leave I know a lot of people have apps that will ding them after so many minutes if they don't hit a button that,
Mm-hmm.
you know, that, so there's different things out there. And yes, I highly recommend it. I hate to say it, every once in a while you could run into a squatter out there,
Mm-hmm.
especially if it's a vacant house. I think we're going to have a bill on the House floor this year. Florida's passed one, Virginia and Tennessee just passed one, and I think we're looking. In fact, Governor Abbott's already talking about it, so I think that might be a done deal.
Good.
So he might insist, but we're looking at that doing the squatters bill, which will help that situation. But I'm
Mm-hmm.
big on always IDs all the way around. So.
Very good. Well, we have a lot of questions that are still coming in, Mike, and I know we only have a certain amount of time with you, but some of the questions are specific around the assistance animals. You mentioned the class on May 8th. Can you tell us more about that class
Yeah,
so that
that is
people
going
can
to
sign
be
up and get those questions answered?
Yeah, that's on May 8th. It's an hour webinar, and it is put on by it's in the agenda under, what's it under? It's on the training page, service, and there's actually did you put up the link to the
We shared a
YouTube
link today.
video?
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
that was one that Brian Birdie, another fellow property manager in San Antonio, that he taught. It's basically the same class, except it's me instead of him on that one, but the
Mm-hmm.
slides are fairly similar. So you can download that from YouTube and look at that one. But the other one is uh, the one about assistance animals that is on the. It's May 8th and it's on the training calendar.
Mm-hmm.
Just look under webinars on the training calendar and search the word assistance.
Yes,
And
and
it's
we
12. It's put on property management. It's put on 12. It's 12 to 1:30, so plenty of time for questions because it's only
mm-hmm.
about 45 minutes long. And
Yes,
then
it
we've
is
got
called Property Management HUD Guidelines for Assistance Animals, and we did
There
share
you
the
go.
link in the
Yeah.
comments. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah. So
And
that's
Mike,
on the training calendar
again, we
too.
have
That one. Yeah. Yeah.
yes, very good. And we have more questions coming in that we just simply don't
That's
have the
fine.
time to get. But if you could, Mike, after today's program, go in and help us answer some of those questions, and
Sure.
I'll get them to you so we can get everybody's questions answered. And
Sure.
to me, it
Absolutely.
seems like maybe we need to have this conversation a little more often, Mike, because we are getting
Yes.
so many questions.
Yeah. We don't have as we're our side is not as popular as the sales side, and until we're having a down market, then we get real popular for a while, and then, then the market comes back, and we're not so popular anymore. So yeah, it's something that I think is sorely needed,
Hmm.
especially now since the whole industry is going to be doing an upheaval. A lot of the rules are going to change,
Right.
and so I don't think it's going to be it's necessarily a bad thing. It's
Hmm.
just going to be a different thing.
Yeah.
And so I think the more education that we can get out there, the better it is. And I want to specifically put a plug in for HAR and for Texas Realtors. We have I travel around the country going to conferences with a lot of property managers, and they are so jealous about what we have in Texas on support of this side of the industry on the leasing and management and all that side because
Hmm.
they don't have anything. You write a lease, you got to have an attorney write it. It's really
Hmm.
weird. It's the Wild West in a lot of other states, but Texas is very, very, very lucky to have a very supportive Texas Realtors and HAR and all the big boards
Hmm.
have a good job, do a very good job on supporting this side of the industry. So use them when you find those classes. Go. We actually have two designation courses: Texas Residential Leasing Specialist, which is a 2-day course, and then Texas Residential Property Manager, which is a 3-day course. And most people would be taking just the first one.
Hmm.
And we teach that 4 times a year. We've taught it once this year. teach it at the end of June, middle of September, and the middle of December, and that's also on the training calendar. It's just Texas Residential Leasing Specialist, and 2 days HAR, and well, it's a Texas Realtors class, so we have other people coming in, but that's a great class for leasing.
Very good. Excellent. Thank you. Just one more question on the education side, if you will, Mike. Miguel is asking if there is a class regarding the eviction process and laws that protect the landlord. Do you know of any classes that
That is
you
actually
can?
one of the 2 hour classes that's part of the Texas Residential Property Manager designation. We have that. I believe that there are, but I don't know when we're scheduling that one. We've completely
Okay.
rewritten it. I think it'll be available sometime this fall. Um, I'll tell you, the biggest problem that I have right now is that I used to do all the evictions myself. It is
Mm-hmm.
not difficult to do an eviction. But there are specific rules you have to follow. The problem is, since the pandemic started and we had the eviction moratorium and all the rules changed,
Mm-hmm.
I don't even go to court anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I have an attorney that does all of our evictions for us. It's not outlandishly expensive, but the process, when you walk into a courtroom now, from the landlord side, there are 15 to 20 legal aid attorneys sitting in the courtroom, ready and willing to help any tenant that's in there.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't have an attorney on your side, you're at a distinct disadvantage. And
Mm-hmm.
so I recommend that you find an attorney. I hate to say that, but I recommend that you find an attorney that is competent in evictions and that knows the courts around Harris County or wherever you live.
Mm-hmm.
And go. I highly recommend go that route. I don't think that a landlord should do it themselves. So,
Okay.
not
Ex-
anymore.
Thank you so much. Well, Mike, this has been wonderful. We've got a lot of people thanking you.
Sure.
Comment here from Alan saying, very helpful. I took my first lease listing in a while, and this was great information as a
Good.
reminder. So thank you so much. Is there anything else, Mike, that you want to share with our members today?
Yeah. The one thing, the steps may look the same, but it's a completely different deal. A
Mm-hmm.
sale is a transaction. When you're doing a sale, you get a listing, you show the property, you get a contract, you negotiate, you get in a title company, and you've got a title company, you've got a mortgage company, you've got an inspector, you've got a tax service, you've got all of these different people helping you get to a close, and then everybody shows up at the table and somebody brings a check, somebody brings keys, and everybody shakes hands and you go away. Lease isn't that way. A
Mm-hmm.
lease is a relationship, and the realtors are basically performing marriage between one landlord and one tenant for the next year. And if anything goes wrong, it's your fault.
Mm-hmm.
And so be careful. And the number one thing, make sure you have the right name on the contract. We
Mm-hmm.
have beautiful tools. You've got access to Realist. You've got access to HCAD. I don't do a management agreement until I get a mortgage statement from my owner. Number one, it shows the mortgage is current, which is something that the landlord is responsible for saying in the lease that the mortgage is current, and it tells us if the taxes are paid, if they're doing all the other. So I love a copy of a mortgage statement. I would part of your listing it says, hey, I've got to make a representation that I don't know that the loan's delinquent, so prove it. So, but that's the way. Get the right name. That's number one thing is get a right name because the title company's not. There's no title company to fix it before you get to closing.
No, very good. Well, thank you so much. Another comment here. Janie said, great updated information. Thank you. I will take the courses you recommended. And we did share links to all of those in the comments. And I
Okay.
know there's still some questions out there that we didn't get to, but we will get those answers from Mike and share those in the comments probably later today
Okay.
for everyone that we missed their questions. And Mike, again, I think it sounds like we need to have you back soon.
Sure. More than happy to. So
Wonderful. Well,
I'd
thank
like
you
to
so
hear more
much.
from them as to what the problems. What are you experiencing? What are the issues you're having? So
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
Well, thank you again, Mike, for your wisdom, sharing all of your knowledge with us today. That is it for this Member Focus Monday. Now, next Monday, just a quick announcement, we will not have a Member Focus Monday next Monday, but we will be back the first Monday of May. So just to make note of that, we will not be here next Monday, but we will be here in 2 weeks. So thank you all for tuning in, and I hope you have a wonderful week. Bye-bye.
Thank you, guys.